The world was screaming metal. One moment, Alistair Finch was looking down at the pristine, snow-dusted mountain range, his next billion-dollar conquest. The next, the helicopter's engine coughed, sputtered, and died with a final, gut-wrenching shriek. The pilot, a man whose name Alistair had already forgotten, was shouting, his words swallowed by the rotor's chaotic death rattle and the deafening roar of the wind. Alistair's own shout was a useless, strangled thing, lost in the violent symphony of their descent. He saw a flash of impossible green through the swirling white, a colossal pine tree reaching for them like a skeletal hand, and then a sickening crunch as the world shattered into a kaleidoscope of glass, snow, and blinding pain. He was thrown against his harness, the force stealing the air from his lungs. Darkness swarmed the edges of his vision, a welcome blanket against the terror. His last coherent thought wasn't of his fortune, his empire, or the legacy he'd meticulously constructed. It was a fleeting, ghost-like image of a little girl's face, a face he hadn't seen in a decade, whispering a name he no longer deserved to hear. Daddy. Then silence, profound and absolute, broken only by the mournful howl of the blizzard that had swallowed him whole. The cold was the first thing to truly bring him back. Not a gentle chill, but a predatory, invasive cold that had sunk its teeth into his very bones. Alistair groaned, the sound a dry crackle in his throat. He tried to move, but a lance of pure agony shot up his left leg, making him cry out, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He was half in, half out of the mangled cockpit. The pilot was slumped over the controls, unnervingly still. Snow, fine as dust, was already burying the wreckage, erasing their violent intrusion from the landscape. Panic, cold and sharp as an icicle, pierced through the fog of his concussion. He was Alistair Finch. His net worth was a figure with 10 digits. He did not die in anonymous ditches. He commanded boardrooms, bent markets to his will, and owned pieces of skylines in a dozen cities. But here, on the side of a mountain that didn't even have a name on his development prospectus, he was just a broken man in a $5,000 suit, bleeding into the snow. He fumbled inside his jacket, his fingers clumsy and numb, searching for his satellite phone. The screen was a spiderweb of shattered glass, as dead as the pilot. A primal scream of rage and despair tore from his lungs, but the wind snatched it away, uncaring. He was going to die here. The thought was not dramatic. It was a simple, terrifying calculation. His expensive watch read 2:17 p.m. How much daylight was left? 4 hours? 5? Not enough. He had to move. He unbuckled his harness, his movements clumsy and agonizing. Every jostle sent waves of nausea and pain through him. He tumbled out of the wreck, landing in a deep drift of snow that cushioned his fall, but instantly began stealing his warmth. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to his hands and knees. His left leg was useless, the bone clearly broken below the knee. He was a dead man. But then he saw it, a flicker of movement through the thick curtain of falling snow. He blinked, thinking it was a hallucination, a trick of his oxygen-starved brain. It was a shape, a small and dark, against the overwhelming white. An animal, perhaps. A deer. A wolf? As it drew closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a child, a little girl, no older than 9 or 10, wrapped in what looked like handmade furs and thick woolen clothes. She moved with a silent, confident grace that was utterly at odds with the raging blizzard. She stopped a dozen feet from him, her head tilted. Her face was framed by a fur-lined hood, revealing large, dark eyes that regarded him with a solemn curiosity, not fear. "Are you broken?" she asked, her voice clear and surprisingly steady, carrying over the wind's howl. Alistair could only stare, dumbfounded. This had to be a dream, a dying man's fantasy. "My leg," he managed to rasp, his throat raw. "Yes," she said, nodding, as if he'd confirmed a simple fact, like the sky being blue. "It is bent the wrong way." She took another step closer, her gaze unwavering. She looked at the mangled helicopter, then back at him, her expression unreadable. "The sky bird is sleeping now. It is very loud when it's awake." Alistair felt a hysterical laugh bubble in his chest, but it came out as a pained cough. Who are you?" "I am Ilara," she said simply. "You are bleeding. You will freeze if you stay here. The Storm Father is angry today." She beckoned with a mittened hand. "Come, my grandfather will help." "Come?" He couldn't even stand. "I can't," he gasped, the effort of speaking exhausting him. "My leg!" Ilara just watched him for a moment, her dark eyes seeming to weigh and measure him. She then turned and looked back the way she came, as if consulting with an unseen companion. When she turned back, her decision was made. "Then I will help you." She walked forward, her small boots crunching in the snow, and knelt beside him. She was so small, a fragile thing against the immense, brutal power of the storm. Yet there was a strange, unnerving competence about her. She pointed towards a dense stand of ancient pine trees, their massive forms barely visible through the swirling snow. "Our home is that way, not far." Not far for her, perhaps. For him, it might as well be the moon. But as he looked into her calm, serious eyes, he saw something that shamed his own rising despair. Resolve. It was the last thing he expected, and the only thing that could possibly save him. The journey was a blur of excruciating pain and hallucinatory cold. Ilara, with a strength that defied her small frame, helped him rig a crude splint using a piece of wreckage and his own expensive silk tie. She showed him how to use a sturdy fallen branch as a crutch. Every movement was a fresh wave of agony. He leaned on her, a titan of industry reduced to depending on a slip of a girl in a wilderness that was actively trying to kill him. He cursed, he wept, he nearly gave up a dozen times, collapsing into the snow, begging to be left to die. Each time, Ilara would simply wait, her patient silence a more potent motivator than any shout could have been. "The cold will take you if you sleep," she'd say, her voice never rising. "You must keep walking, just to the next tree." Her world was measured in trees, not city blocks. He focused on her small back, a tiny beacon in the white maelstrom. She navigated the forest with an instinct that baffled him. There were no paths, no markers that his urban eyes could discern, yet she moved with purpose, winding through snow-heavy pines and around monolithic, frost-covered boulders. The world narrowed to the crunch of snow, the searing pain in his leg, and the small, steady presence beside him. He began to drift, his mind playing tricks on him. The swirling snow sometimes looked like the ticker tape from the stock exchange, the howl of the wind like the clamor of the trading floor. He saw the faces of his board members, their expressions a mixture of pity and predatory glee at his weakness. He saw his ex-wife, her face etched with the disappointment that had become her permanent expression in their final years together. And again, he saw his daughter, Lily, as a child, her hand in his, looking up at him with an adoration he had so carelessly squandered. "We're here." Ilara's voice cut through his delirium, He looked up. Before them was a sheer rock face, a wall of gray stone that seemed to go on forever, plastered with snow and ice. It was a dead end. Despair, final and crushing, washed over him. She had led him to a cliff to die. "Here!" he croaked, his voice thick with defeat. Alara ignored his tone and walked towards a place where a cascade of thick, ancient ivy, now frozen and brittle, clung to the rock. She pushed it aside like a curtain, revealing a dark opening, no taller than a man. A cave. From within, he could feel a faint, almost imperceptible warmth and the smell of wood smoke. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The entrance gave way to a low, narrow passage that quickly opened into a vast, central chamber. Alistair's breath hitched, and not just from the pain. The cavern was enormous, the ceiling arching high overhead, lost in shadow. The air was cool but dry, and the smoky scent was stronger here. A fire burned in a wide, stone-ringed pit in the center of the chamber, its flames dancing and casting flickering golden light on the stone walls. The space was clearly a home. Animal pelts covered the floor, worn smooth with use. Shelves carved directly into the rock held clay pots, bundles of dried herbs, and neatly stacked firewood. It was primitive, yet possessed a sense of order and deep-rooted peace that Alistair's sterile, architect-designed penthouse had never achieved. An old man rose from a wooden stool near the fire. He was tall and lean, with a face that looked as if it had been carved from the same stone as the cave. His long gray hair was tied back with a leather thong, and his eyes, the same dark color as Alara's, were sharp and intelligent. They swept over Alistair, taking in his torn suit, his ashen face, and his mangled leg with an unnerving acuity. "Alara!" The man's voice was a low rumble, like rocks shifting deep underground. "What have you brought back from the storm?" "He fell from the sky bird, grandfather," Alara said, her tone matter-of-fact. "His leg is bent." The old man, Silas, walked towards them. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his gaze never leaving Alistair. He knelt, his knees cracking softly, and examined the leg. His touch was surprisingly gentle, his fingers probing the injury with an expert's confidence. Alistair flinched, biting back a cry. "A clean break of the tibia," Silas announced, looking up at Alistair. His eyes held no pity, only a calm, analytical assessment. "You are lucky. It could have been much worse." Another figure emerged from a shadowed alcove. A woman, perhaps in her late 30s, with the same dark hair and eyes as the others. She carried a wooden bowl that steamed, smelling of herbs and something savory. This must be Anya, Alara's mother. She moved with the same quiet poise, her expression one of weary compassion. She offered the bowl to Alistair. "Drink this. It will help with the pain and the cold." Alistair, shivering uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was fading, took the bowl with trembling hands. It was a hot, earthy broth. He drank it greedily. It warmed him from the inside out, a creeping, gentle heat that seemed to loosen the knots of tension in his body. He felt his eyelids grow heavy. "We must set the bone," Silas said, his voice seeming to come from a great distance. "It will hurt." Alistair barely registered the words. The world was softening, the hard edges of the cave blurring. He saw Silas and Anya exchange a look. He felt them cutting away his ruined trousers, felt their strong, sure hands on his leg. He heard Alara's soft voice, telling him a story about a clever raven who tricked a greedy bear. He tried to cling to the words, but they slipped away, like smoke. Then came a sharp, blinding explosion of pain, as Silas set the bone, a pain so immense it was almost abstract. Alistair screamed, a raw, guttural sound that echoed in the vastness of the cavern. And then, blessedly, nothing at all. He drifted in a feverish sea of pain and disjointed memories. Time became a fluid, meaningless concept. He was aware of moments of lucidity, like islands in a dark ocean. He would wake to the soft touch of a cool cloth on his forehead, Anya's concerned face hovering above him. He would hear the crackle of the fire and the low murmur of conversation in a language he didn't understand. Sometimes he'd open his eyes to find Ilara sitting quietly on a stool nearby, carving a piece of wood with a small, sharp knife, her focus absolute. In his delirium, she often blurred with his own daughter, Lily. He'd call out to her, apologies tumbling from his parched lips, confessing his absences, his broken promises, the birthdays he'd missed for board meetings, the school plays he'd skipped for conference calls. "I'm sorry, Lily," he'd rasp, reaching out a trembling hand. "I'm so sorry." Once, he felt a small, warm hand close around his. "My name is Ilara," the girl's voice said, soft but firm. "You should rest now." The fever dreams were relentless. He was back in his office. The city lights spread out below him like a carpet of fallen stars. The numbers on his screens were flashing red, his empire crumbling. His partners were laughing at him, their faces twisting into grotesque masks. He was falling, not from a helicopter, but from the top of his own skyscraper, the wind ripping at his suit, the ground rushing up to meet him. He would wake up gasping, his body slick with sweat, the rough fur blankets a strange weight on him. During these moments of terror, Anya would be there with a cup of bitter, medicinal tea that would force him back into a heavy, dreamless sleep. Slowly, agonizingly, the fever broke. The world began to solidify, the lines between dream and reality sharpening. He started to notice the details of his surroundings. The cave was not just a single chamber, but a complex of interconnected spaces. He was resting in an alcove, on a bed of soft furs, laid over a thick mattress of pine boughs. The splint on his leg was a masterpiece of rustic engineering, bound with strips of leather and padded with moss. The pain was still a constant companion, but it had subsided from a roaring inferno to a manageable, throbbing ache. He began to eat, his appetite returning. The food was simple, but deeply nourishing. Hearty stews of root vegetables, and some kind of game meat, dense dark bread baked on a hot stone near the fire, and a variety of herbal teas. He watched his hosts, his mind slowly regaining its analytical edge. They lived a life of quiet, rhythmic purpose, dictated by the needs of the day and the rhythm of the storm outside, which still raged, its muffled howl a constant reminder of his isolation. Silas was the patriarch, a man of few words, but immense presence. He spent his time mending tools, carving wood, and tending the fire. His hands, though gnarled with age, were incredibly skilled. Alistair watched him fashion a perfect wooden spoon from a block of wood, with nothing more than a knife and a piece of sandstone for polishing. There was a patience in his work that Alistair, a man of instant decisions and immediate results, found both baffling and mesmerizing. Anya was the heart of their small household. She was the healer, the cook, the tender of their hidden world. She moved with an economy of motion, her tasks flowing into one another in a seamless dance. She would grind herbs with a stone pestle, her face a mask of concentration, then move to stir a pot, her movements fluid and unhurried. She spoke to him in quiet, simple English, asking if he needed anything, her dark eyes holding a deep well of compassion that he felt he had done nothing to deserve. And then there was Alara. The girl was a creature of the cave and the forest. She moved between the two worlds with ease. She would sit for hours by the fire, listening to Silas's stories, her eyes wide with wonder. Then she would disappear into the storm for a short time, returning with her cheeks pink from the cold, carrying a bundle of firewood or checking a snare line she had set near the entrance. She treated Alistair with a mixture of childlike curiosity and an old soul's gravity. She would ask him questions about his world, questions so simple they were profound. "Why is your bird made of metal?" she asked one day, watching him idly scratch a design in the dirt floor. "It helps it fly," he answered, his voice still weak. "It's strong. But it is not alive," she stated. "The eagles that nest on the high cliffs are alive. Their wings know the wind. Your bird only knows how to break." He had no answer for that. He started to talk, at first in short, clipped sentences, then in longer explanations as his strength returned. He told her about cities, about buildings so tall they touched the clouds, about cars that moved without being pulled, about lights that turned night into day. He tried to explain what he did for a living, the concept of buying and selling land, of building things. "You buy the earth?" she asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. "But no one can own the earth. We only borrow it for a little while." Her simple, unassailable logic chipped away at the foundations of his world. Everything he had ever valued, wealth, power, ownership, was meaningless here. Here, value was measured in dry firewood, a full stew pot, and the knowledge of which herbs could bring down a fever. Stripped of his custom-tailored suits, his Swiss watch, and the authority of his name, he felt naked, an infant in this ancient, self-sufficient world. Who was Alistair Finch without the Finch Corporation? He was beginning to realize he didn't know. One afternoon, he felt strong enough to sit up on his own for an extended period. The blizzard had finally subsided, and a pale, watery sunlight filtered into the main chamber from the entrance, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Alara came and sat with him. "Grandfather says the anger has passed. The mountain is quiet now." "How long have I been here?" he asked. 10 suns have risen and set," she replied. 10 days. A rescue party would be looking for him. The thought, which should have brought relief, was accompanied by a strange pang of something he couldn't name. He had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythms of the cave, the flickering firelight, the absence of ringing phones and urgent emails. "Your people will be looking for you," Silas said, joining them. He had overheard. Alistair nodded. "Yes, they will." "This is a difficult place to be found," Silas stated, not with malice, but as a simple fact. "We have been here for a long time. No one has ever found us." Alistair looked at the old man, a question burning in his mind. "Why? Why do you live like this? Hidden away from everyone?" Silas stoked the fire, sending a shower of orange sparks into the air. He was silent for a long time, and Alistair thought he might not answer. "This place is older than your cities," he said finally, his gaze fixed on the flames. "My ancestors were the first people of this mountain. They learned its secrets, its moods, its sacred places. They were its guardians. When your people came, with their maps and their machines, my ancestors retreated. They knew that to be seen was to be destroyed. So they came here, to this network of caves, a place we have always known. We are not hiding from the world. We are preserving it. He looked at Alistair, his eyes sharp. The world you come from, it does not preserve. It consumes. The words hit Alistair with the force of a physical blow. Consume. That was the perfect word for what he did. He consumed land, resources, smaller companies, people's livelihoods, all to feed the insatiable appetite of his corporation. He was the apex predator of his world. But here he was nothing. A broken parasite, dependent on the kindness of the very people whose way of life he would have unthinkingly destroyed. A horrifying realization began to dawn in the back of his mind. He remembered the maps in his office, the satellite images, the geological surveys. He was here to finalize the purchase of a huge tract of pristine wilderness to build the most exclusive, luxurious mountain resort in the world. The Finch Eyrie, he was going to call it. It would have a private helipad, a champagne bar carved into a cliffside, and infinity pools overlooking the valleys. And it was going to be built right here. He was trespassing on the land he intended to pave over. These people, this family that had saved his life, were the unknown, uncounted inhabitants of the land he was about to seize. He felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with his injuries. He was the monster at their door, and they had welcomed him in, tended his wounds, and shared their fire with him. The days that followed were a torment of guilt and slow healing. He began to move around the main cavern using the crutch Silas had made for him. He learned more about their lives. Anya showed him the vast stores of preserved foods in a cold, deep cavern they called the winter pantry. Jars of dried berries, smoked fish, cured meats, and dried mushrooms. Silas explained how they tracked the seasons, not by a calendar, but by the angle of the sun as it shone through a specific fissure in the cave roof at midday. It was a life of profound connection to the natural world, a connection Alistair had never imagined was possible. He spent hours talking with Alara. He found himself confessing things to this strange, wise child that he had never told anyone. He told her about Lily, about how he had let his ambition poison their relationship, how he'd bought her things, ponies, cars, apartments, as substitutes for his time, for his love, how she had finally stopped trying, her calls becoming less frequent until they stopped altogether. I thought if I gave her everything, she would be happy, he said, his voice thick with regret. But you did not give her yourself, Alara said, her gaze direct and unflinching. A gift is only a thing. It does not have a heart. He began to see his daughter in Alara's fierce independence, in her quiet wisdom. He saw the child Lily had been, before he had taught her that his love was conditional, that it could be earned with good grades and respectable life choices, but was secondary to a quarterly report. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than any fatigue from his injury. His world, which had once seemed so solid and important, now felt like a fragile, gaudy artifice. What was the point of owning the world if you were a stranger to your own child? One day, Alara led him deeper into the cave system. There is something I want to show you, she said, her eyes alight with a rare, childlike excitement. She carried a tallow lamp that cast a warm, flickering glow on the passage walls. The air grew warmer and more humid as they descended, and he could hear the sound of running water. The narrow passage opened into another cavern, and Alistair gasped. It was a place of impossible beauty. A geothermal spring bubbled up into a series of terraced, crystal-clear pools, sending clouds of warm steam into the cool air. The water had deposited minerals over centuries, creating smooth, white and gold formations that looked like melted sculptures. Luminous mosses and ferns, sustained by the warmth and moisture, grew in lush carpets on the rock walls, their vibrant green a shocking contrast to the stark white world outside. The entire cavern glowed with a soft, ethereal light from the bioluminescent fungi that clung to the ceiling like a constellation of earthbound stars. It was a secret, subterranean paradise. "This is the heart of the mountain," Alara whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "It keeps us warm in the winter. The water heals. Grandfather says it is a place of great power." Alistair stared, speechless. This was the geothermal anomaly his surveyors had noted in their report, the one he had planned to exploit as a unique thermal spa experience for his wealthy clientele. He had intended to cage this sacred living place, put a price on it, and sell entry to the highest bidder. He felt a profound sense of desecration, as if he had walked into a cathedral with a sledgehammer. He and Alara sat by the edge of the largest pool, the warm steam caressing their faces. "When I was very little," Alara said, her voice soft, "I brought a small bird here. Its wing was broken. I made a little nest for it by the warm water, and my mother made a paste of herbs for its wing. Every day I would talk to it, and one day it flew away. The heart of the mountain made it whole again." Alistair looked at his own splinted leg, at the kindness he had been shown. He thought of his own broken life, his broken relationship with his daughter. He was the wounded bird, but could a place like this truly heal a wound that was soul deep? As he sat there, in the warm, glowing dark, he knew he was at a crossroads. The path back to his old life was clear. He could be rescued. He could feign ignorance, pay these people off, force them out with lawyers and court orders. He had the power, the resources. He could take this sacred place and turn it into a commodity. The Finch Corporation would applaud his ruthlessness. It was what he was good at. Or he could choose another path, a harder, unknown path, a path of restitution. He looked at Alara, her face illuminated by the magical glow of the cavern, and he saw the choice clearly for the first time. The weight of his entire life, of every selfish decision and every emotional shortcut, seemed to press down on him. The choice was not just about this land, about this family. It was about what kind of man he wanted to be. It was about whether he was still capable of being the father his daughter had once adored. The next morning he made his decision. He found Silas by the fire, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. The rhythmic scrape of steel on stone was the only sound in the cavern. "Silas," Alistair began, his voice steady, "I have not been honest with you." The old man did not stop his work, but Alistair knew he had his full attention. "My name is Alistair Finch. I am the CEO of the Finch Corporation." He saw a flicker of something in the old man's eyes. Not surprise, but a deep, weary recognition, as if he had been expecting this all along. "We are the company that is buying this land. I was in the helicopter to do a final survey before we broke ground." He let the words hang in the air, a vile confession. He expected anger, shouting, a demand for him to leave. Instead, Silas set down his knife and stone and looked at him, his expression one of profound sadness. "So, the wolf I pulled from the snare is the same one that has been killing my sheep." I didn't know anyone lived here," Alistair stammered, the excuse sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "Our surveys, our records." The land was listed as uninhabited. "We are not on your maps," Silas said, his voice low. "To you, if something is not on a map, it does not exist. You see land, timber, rock, water. You see numbers on a ledger. You don't see a home. You don't see the graves of my ancestors. You don't see the heart of the mountain." Alistair flinched. He deserved the scorn, the hatred. "I am not that man anymore," he said, the words feeling both strange and true on his tongue. What Alara has shown me. I can't destroy this place. I won't." Silas studied his face, his gaze penetrating, searching for the lie. "Words are wind, Alistair Finch. Your world is built on promises that are broken as easily as they are made. Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm asking you to," Alistair said, his voice raw with an emotion he hadn't felt in years, sincerity. "I have a satellite phone in the wreckage. The battery is dead, but your fire, maybe we can find a way to generate some heat, some energy. If I can make one call, I can stop this. I can call off the deal. I can save this place." Just then, a crisis arrived, not from the outside world, but from within their own. Anya rushed into the main chamber from a deeper passage, her face pale with fear. "It's Silas," she said, her voice trembling. "He collapsed. I think it's his heart." Alistair's blood ran cold. He and Anya hurried to Silas's sleeping alcove. The old man was lying on his furs, his breathing shallow and ragged, his face a ghastly shade of gray. His eyes were closed, and he was unresponsive. Anya felt for his pulse, her medical knowledge reaching its limit. "It is weak and fast," she whispered, her composure finally breaking. "I have herbs for fever, for pain, for infection, but for this I have nothing. He needs a doctor, a real doctor." The terrible irony was crushing. The man who had healed Alistair now needed a healing that this mountain could not provide. He needed the very world Alistair had come from, the world of modern medicine, of hospitals and machines. And the only thing that could bridge that gap was lying in a frozen heap of metal a few miles away. There was no more choice. There was only necessity. "We have to get the phone," Alistair said, his voice firm, taking charge. "Anya, you stay with him. Keep him warm. Alara." He turned to the girl, who was standing in the entrance to the alcove, her small face a mask of terror. "Alara, I need your help. I can't make it to the wreckage alone, not with this leg. You know the way. You have to take me." Alara looked from her grandfather's still form to Alistair's face. The fear in her eyes was replaced by the same quiet resolve he had seen during the blizzard. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "I will take you." The journey back to the helicopter was a desperate race against time. The snow was still deep, but the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The beauty of the landscape was a cruel joke. Alistair pushed himself harder than he ever had in his life, the pain in his leg a distant, unimportant signal. He was driven by a single, burning purpose. He owed Silas his life. He would not let him die. Alara was his guide, his eyes, his strength. She found the easiest paths, pointed out the hidden patches of ice, and helped him navigate the treacherous terrain. They found the wreckage half buried in a drift, a metal carcass in the silent woods. Alistair dug through the snow and debris with his bare hands, his fingers quickly becoming numb. He finally found the satellite phone. It was cold and dead, as he'd expected. "We need to warm the battery," he said, thinking aloud. "Slowly. If we heat it too fast, it could be damaged." Back in the cave, they worked with frantic urgency. Alistair, using his limited knowledge of physics, explained his idea. They wrapped the phone's battery in layers of dry cloth and placed it on a warm stone near the edge of the fire, turning it every few minutes. It was a desperate long shot. Hours passed. Silas's breathing grew more shallow. Anya sat by his side, bathing his face, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Elara sat by the fire, watching the phone as if her gaze alone could will it back to life. Alistair paced the cavern like a caged animal, his helplessness a physical torment. Finally, he could wait no longer. He took the battery, its casing now warm to the touch, and clicked it back into the phone. He held his breath and pressed the power button. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered, and the manufacturer's logo appeared. A weak, triumphant cry escaped Alistair's lips. There was only one bar of service, and the battery icon was a sliver of red, but it was enough. He dialed the number for his personal assistant, a woman who could move mountains with a single phone call. "Harris, it's Finch." The gasp on the other end of the line was audible. "Mr. Finch, my God, we thought you were... Where are you?" "No time for that," he cut her off, his voice sharp and commanding, the voice of the old Alistair, but now wielded for a different purpose. "I have 2 minutes of battery, so listen carefully. I need a medical evacuation helicopter, the best, dispatched to these coordinates immediately. There's a man here, heart attack. He's critical. That's the priority. Get it done. Now." He rattled off the coordinates he'd memorized from the helicopter's GPS before it died. "And Harris, one more thing. Contact the board. Tell them the Airy project is dead. Terminate the land deal, all of it. Use any reason you want. Environmental instability, geological faults. I don't care. Just kill it. That's a direct order." "But sir, the deposits, the investors—" "I don't care!" he roared, the sound echoing in the cavern. "Bury it in legal fees. I'll cover every cent myself. Just make it go away. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," she said, her voice shaking slightly. The line went dead. The battery was gone. He stood in the silence of the cave, the plastic phone feeling impossibly light in his hand. He had just voluntarily destroyed a billion-dollar project, a move that would send shockwaves through his company and the market. He had thrown a grenade into the center of his own meticulously built empire, and he had never felt so free. The weight was agonizing. They brought Silas closer to the entrance of the cave, wrapping him in every fur they had. Alistair stood with Elara and Anya, scanning the sky. He had no idea if his message had gotten through, if the signal had been strong enough, if Harris would be able to bypass the red tape in time. He was a man used to control, and now all he could do was wait and hope. Elara slipped her small hand into his. "You did it," she said, her voice a whisper. "You called the sky bird to help, grandfather." He squeezed her hand, unable to speak. He had called it, yes, but he had also called it off. He had summoned the machines of his world to save a life, and in the same breath had commanded them to leave this place in peace. After what felt like an eternity, they heard it. A faint, distant chopping sound. It grew steadily louder, a mechanical heartbeat in the silent mountains. A state-of-the-art medevac helicopter appeared over the ridge, a vibrant red and white against the blue sky. It circled once, then began its descent, its rotors whipping the snow into a frenzy. 2 paramedics rappelled down, their movements efficient and professional. They took one look at Silas, strapped him to a stretcher, and hooked him up to a portable monitor. It all happened in a blur of controlled chaos. As they prepared to hoist Silas up, one of the paramedics looked at Alistair's splinted leg. "Sir, are you Alistair Finch? We need to get you out of here too." Alistair shook his head. "Get him to the hospital first. He's the priority. I'm stable. Come back for me." The paramedic hesitated, then saw the look in Alistair's eyes and nodded. He spoke into his radio, and the stretcher carrying Silas began its ascent. Anya watched, her hands clasped to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Alara stood beside her, her small frame rigid, her eyes fixed on her grandfather's form, disappearing into the belly of the machine. Just before the helicopter departed, a rope ladder was dropped. "Sir, we can't leave you here," the pilot's voice crackled over the paramedic's radio. Alistair knew he was right. It was time to go. He turned to Anya and Alara. "I have to go," he said, his voice thick. Anya stepped forward and embraced him, a gesture of profound gratitude that left him humbled. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved his life." He then knelt, wincing at the pain in his leg, so he was eye level with Alara. He didn't know what to say. How do you thank someone for saving not just your life, but your soul? "I will never forget what you did for me, Alara," he said. "You and your family. I will make sure this place, your home, is protected. Always. That is a promise I will not break." Alara looked at him, her dark eyes searching his. She seemed to see the truth of his words. She reached out and touched the rough stubble on his cheek. "Your heart was bent too," she said softly. "I think the mountain is helping it heal." She then pressed something into his hand. It was the small wooden bird she had been carving, its lines simple but perfect. He closed his hand around it, the smooth wood a comfort against his palm. He turned and grabbed the ladder, the paramedics helping him. As he was lifted into the air, the world of the cave, of the forest, of the hidden family, shrank below him. He saw two small figures standing in the snow, watching him go, until they were just specks in the vast white wilderness. The return to civilization was a jarring, violent assault on his senses. The noise, the lights, the sheer number of people. He was taken to the same hospital as Silas, where his leg was properly set in a cast, and he was treated for exposure and dehydration. The first person he saw when he was settled in his private room was his assistant, Harris, her face a mixture of relief and utter bewilderment. "The project is terminated," she said. "The legal team is in meltdown. The board is demanding a meeting, but it's done. And an anonymous trust has been established to purchase the land and cede it to the federal government as a protected national park. The initial funding deposit was astronomical." Alistair just nodded, a faint smile on his face. He had wired the money from the helicopter on the way to the hospital. "Good," he said. "And Silas? The man who came in with me?" "He's in stable condition," Harris reported. "The doctor said another hour, and he would have been gone. He's a fighter. His daughter and granddaughter are with him now." Alistair felt a wave of relief, so profound it left him dizzy. He had done it. He had kept his promise. He spent 2 days in the hospital, fielding frantic calls and issuing curt, unshakable orders. He was dismantling years of work, and he felt nothing but peace. But there was one more piece of his old life he had to fix. One more broken promise he had to try and mend. When he was discharged, he didn't go to his office. He didn't go to his penthouse. He took a taxi to a modest, tree-lined street in a quiet part of the city. He walked up the path to a small house with a well-tended garden. his crutches awkward on the stone walkway. He rang the doorbell, his heart pounding in his chest, with a fear he hadn't felt in the blizzard, or in the boardroom. The door opened, and there she was, Lily. She was in her late 20s now, her face thinner, her eyes holding a caution that he had put there. She looked at him, at his cast, his haggard appearance, and her expression was a mixture of shock and long-practiced indifference. "Dad," she said, the words sounding foreign, "what happened to you?" "It's a long story," he said, his voice quiet. Can I come in?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, an old reflex of self-protection. Then she sighed and stepped aside. He entered her home. It was filled with books and plants and art. It was a real home, not a showroom like his penthouse. It was filled with her. I heard on the news you were missing," she said, not looking at him, busying herself with straightening a stack of magazines. "They said your helicopter went down." "It did," he said. He didn't know where to start. The apologies he had practiced in his head now seemed hollow and inadequate, so he simply held out his hand. In his palm was the small wooden bird that Alara had given him. Lily looked at it, confused. "What's this?" "A gift," he said, "from a little girl who reminded me of you. She saved my life. She showed me that I've been living it all wrong, Lily. That I broke the most important thing I ever had. Us." He looked at her, his eyes, for the first time in her memory, completely open, with no agenda, no defense. They were filled with a raw, aching vulnerability. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I can't buy back the years I missed, but I'm here now, and I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, the tears she had sworn she would never let him see again. She looked from the small bird to her father's broken, humbled form. She saw not the titan of industry, but just a man, lost and in pain, finally finding his way home. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't offer forgiveness, not yet. It was too soon for that. But she took a small, hesitant step towards him, and for the first time in a very long time, she called him by the name the little girl in his fever dreams had whispered. "Daddy," she said, her voice choked with a decade of unspoken grief and a tiny, fragile seed of hope. "You're home."